Lebanon County. This is something we talked about over the last couple of months. John, you've inquired to see if we've heard anything yet, and we finally have. I'm pleased to report that they have moved Lebanon County from a BBB+ with a positive outlook to an A with a positive outlook. That's actually 2 steps.
Was the outlook positive then?
It was, yes. And that's what they had to deal with, that outlook one way or the other, and
Gotcha.
thankfully chose to deal with it by upping our rating. I want to say thanks to Bob Metley and Jay Wanger, who assisted with the rating call, and it's been, I think, over 2 months since that original rating call. We just kept reminding and kept waiting, and they were asking for a little more information time and time again until finally got to the rating just last week. You each have a copy of it, handed some out as well, and sent it out by email, but there are a couple of things that they noted. 2 things they noted are still sort of lingering there, one of which is weak economy. They, in the actual body of it, they noted that the Lebanon County's economy is considered by them to be weak, has an estimated population of 137,000, and the per capita effective buying income is 94% of the national level. That's one of the main things they cited. They did talk about 40% of the county is still considered agricultural, but it is diversifying somewhat into industrial and service enterprises. Largest employer is Department of Military Affairs, and they noted some other leading employers, which include Bell and Evans and the Good Samaritan Hospital. They also made a note of what they're still referring to as weak management, and what they mean by that, and I'll quote, "The recent structural imbalance still constrains our view of the county's financial management." So up until just a couple of years ago, the county was structurally imbalanced for many years, and certainly more years imbalanced than it is balanced, and they're still referring back to that. Essentially saying that if the county continues to monitor its budget and make adjustments as necessary to maintain structural balance, our view of management could improve. So that's just sort of something that's still hanging on there, that we can't shake until we have a better track record of balanced budgets. Adequate, on the upside, they noted adequate budgetary performance. They noted very strong budgetary flexibility, very strong liquidity, and very strong debt and contingent liability position. Again, on the flip side of the weak management, they said, following a history of structural imbalance, we believe the county's performance has stabilized. They noted that the nursing home proceeds of 2015, from those proceeds, management was able to begin 100% funding of the pension ARC, and is committed to fully funding the ARC hereafter. Further, 2015, management opted to fund the pension by an additional $10 million to improve its funded level ratio, which we consider non-recurring, which they're recognizing that was just a one-time. Recent actions by the county should alleviate unpredictable budgetary shortfalls and stabilize performance. Strong budgetary flexibility. They note that a policy to maintain a minimum unrestricted general fund balance equaling 2 months of general fund expenditures, that even at that level, coupled with no plans to spend it down, they believe that flexibility is likely to remain very strong. They believe that strong reserve position provides cushion in case of a state budget impasse resulting in delayed state aid payments. Very strong liquidity, with available cash at 21% of total governmental fund expenditures, and 6.8 times governmental debt service. In our view, the county has strong access to external liquidity if necessary. So if there's a need for a short-term borrowing or long-term, we have very good access to that sort of thing.
And now at better rates.
And yes. And lastly, they note the strong debt and contingent liability profile. Debt service is only 3.2% of total governmental fund expenditures, which is very good, and 89% of that debt is scheduled to be repaid within 10 years, which in their view, is a positive credit factor. They did note, I was able to share this with them since their original call, they did note that the county entered into a $2.4 million energy savings contract to make capital improvements, but expects the savings from the contract to offset the repayment of the debt. And then lastly, they recounted the history of the pension fund under that debt and contingent liability profile. They recounted the history of the pension fund over the last 15 years, noting that from 2003 to 2011, the county did not make full pension contributions. Began some small contributions in 2012 and 2013, but then fiscal 14 made 100% of the annual required contribution, and in 15 funded at 100%, including an additional $10 million. So while the plan was at one time funded at 69.1% in 2013, it is now up to 85.3%. They see that as a very, very strong factor. So again, I don't know if any of you have comments, or Bob or Jay might want to add anything to that. Again, I really appreciate their help on this. This is a team effort. And, obviously, some of the decisions that were made put us in a strong position here, but it's also important to be able to communicate those and convey those to S&P so that they can make a good rating. So.
Jay? Robert?
I'll just make a couple comments. Jimmy, I thought you did a very good job of summarizing. I tried to put this into a picture. I thought sometimes the picture is better than the text, so let me pass this around. There's one small discrepancy in there, but what you really see is a trend that started in 2014, which was the low point in the rating cycle. That was March of 2014, when S&P gave the county a BBB- rating with the developing story. And it's rare to get a developing story outlook. It's either stable, positive, or negative. And so the developing story was, if you did not take some corrective action to your budget issues, you would have been downgraded further in the very near term. But at that time, we had indicated that you were taking corrective steps, and so as opposed to going lower, you got a BBB- with a developing story. From that point, it really took the better part of 3 years to get to where you are today, which is A, with a positive outlook. And that is primarily because in the post-recession rating agency methodology, they're looking more at sustained trends. So they look at 3-year trends. So when you got to the BBB+ with a positive outlook, that was kind of a marker that you were doing what you said you would and what they expect you to do, but not for a long enough period of time. They have basically 12 months to react to that positive outlook, and so this year, as Jamie said, in March or April, they started their process. And with another year of balanced budgets, including the tax increase and funding of the pension plan, you got to the A level with a positive outlook. So what that means is by this time next year, they will take another look at it. Based on what they indicated in the rating report, it is possible that you would go to A+ with a stable outlook. I would say, just from our experience, it's unlikely that a county of this size, given the backdrop of what they describe as a weak economy, that you would get to AA. That would be, it's a pretty rare error, and it would take a lot of cash reserves, and I would be very surprised if you got to that level. But having said that, to get to A or A+ is a phenomenal outcome in a relatively short period of time. And really positions the county to have a lot of borrowing and capital needs flexibility as you move forward. As Jamie pointed out, and S&P noted, your debt is relatively short-term. Nearly all of it gets repaid in the next 9 to 10 years, so that if in the future there are capital needs for whatever projects, you certainly have flexibility to bring those online without it resulting in a significant tax increase to the taxpayers.
I just found under strong institutional framework on page 5, it lists us, it says the institutional framework score for Pennsylvania home rule counties is strong. We are not a home rule county. And I thought that inaccuracy should be pointed out so that in the future could be corrected.
There were a couple things we tried to point out and were ignored.
And then also, the other thing is that they do acknowledge that the policy was set for a capital reserve fund, but they still say we lack a formal capital improvement fund, formal debt policies, and multi-year financial forecast. So that was another reason they listed under weed management. Those are things I think we can improve upon.
Was another point we made. There were, unfortunately, the format of this rating report is consistent for, if you could pick up any county and it would be a similar report. And so there are some macro issues that they highlight in all of these. There were some issues that we tried to address that we thought were outdated or, to your point, inaccurate. And I don't know if they just felt like we gave them the comments too late, or if we just, so to back up, we're only allowed to comment on factual issues. We really can't comment on their opinions or their style. So our report is, our ability to influence a report is very, very limited. We did make several suggestions of what we thought was outdated or not completely accurate, and it just...
Some of them made it.
Some did, yeah, they took some, yes, but not all.
Yeah,
But thank you.
And one thing I remember you saying, Jay, was that a formal debt policy is very unusual for a county to
Very
have.
unusual, yeah.
That's something that other institutional...
It's more common in a healthcare or higher ed where the ability to borrow money is largely not so much your ability to raise revenue, but also your balance sheet. So we see formal debt policies where the debt is affected by the balance sheet as well as the operating statement, and much, much less in the governmental sector. There are a couple of school districts in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that have debt policies. I'm not aware of any counties. That's not to say they don't exist, but I'm not aware of any. So it's rare, but again, it is a fixed structure that they go through in their rating template, and some of these things that we think are addressed, they don't see it the same way. Some of the things we think don't apply, they don't see it the same way.
And then in practical application, the way this works is they send you, in this case at 9 in the morning, they send a draft rating with 6 pages of text, and they say you have 2 hours to dispute anything or make any corrections, and so you have to drop everything and kind of do that. As Jay said, there were a few things. They were still noting assessment appeals at a lowered level, I think, and we were able to, I made a suggested wording of that it's gone actually to a trickle, I think, where you guys are having assessment appeal afternoons with only 2 appeals anymore. So they did revise that a little bit and said it's gone to very low levels. There was a comment about in the economy about North Cornwall Commons. I was able to let them know that construction has now commenced. At the time, that was in our rating, or that was noted in our rating before about some local development. I was able to tell them that started, and they noted that in here. What else? The Honeywell, we added that to it at the last minute. So they did take on some of the things. So you give them the comments, you wait for the final, and then you read through and hope that what you said they incorporated.
But I think in the management day-to-day, we certainly see an easing of stress in that area by having our fiscal house in order, so that's all good. And also on the borrowing side, we may have an immediate, almost response with Honeywell. That we're waiting a little bit to hear what the rate was going to be, and that may help with that.
Yes, we were.
And also if the 911, other things that we want to do. The only thing that I learned it about a week ago, or was reminded of it when we had the 25th anniversary of the preservation folks.
Preservation, yeah.
That when the county borrowed was it $2.5 million?
There were a couple of occasions, but it might be
For
total.
farmland preservation, that money, that ended up being, to me, a wise move because it leveraged $17 million in state and federal monies that, and we only now have 5 years left on that note. So you can feel the mow is going in the right direction. So that's a good place to be. And Mr. Controller, do you have any comment on?
No, I just think the outcome, I was, like Jamie, I was more than pleased. I wasn't sure. In talking to Mr. Galloway, I think it was hard to read
It is hard.
where he was going from and where he was leading. I was pleasantly surprised.
Anything else? Any questions?
Well, I guess if maybe you could expound a little bit more on the opportunities that this opens for you, whether it moves things up, it's going to quicken things. The 9/11, of course, is mentioned in here. or whether you're kind of gonna wait and see how budgetary things develop. What's your feelings on borrowing
Well,
for
I
big
think
projects?
he just mentioned Honeywell. I think that's that's a potential immediate benefit is that, you know, we were looking at, and Jay's gonna crunch some numbers for us, but we were looking at doing a bank lease for that. We reached out to a few, and it's hard to get a lease from a bank for 20 years for capital equipment. We weren't really considering doing that in the form of a bond issue because there are expenses related to a bond issue, but potentially with going from a BBB plus to an A, that bond issue might be more beneficial and result in even more savings in the Honeywell program because the cost of the financing would go down, so we could benefit from that in the immediate. But in the, you know, it's over the long term when you do the 15 and 20-year notes and you're sitting there with an A rather than a BBB plus, you're saving a lot more, potentially hundreds of thousands over the term.
And we're not borrowing in January, February, March, you know, on a trans, you know, those kind of things we benefited from.
I guess I was looking for more specifics of whether there's anything out there now that you want to move on. I mean, a year ago, it was floated that maybe we can borrow to pay off all the pension obligation, and that was met with lukewarm. But so I guess I'm asking you whether you feel the likelihood of borrowing for big projects is more likely in the near future, or whether you're not there yet.
Well, we have P25 to adhere to, P25 standards for 911 by 2020 or 2021. So that's going to be a need. We have to upgrade what we have downstairs, and that's not going to be cheap. So I would say that's probably the biggest looming need for taking out some debt in the future. You know, Bob Dowd's going to have to get a handle on what it is we need and then do vendor selection, that sort of thing. You know, what, how much of the upgrade we need and that and so on. But that's, I would say that's the most immediate.
And is that it? Can you give me a forecast on that?
Gosh,
Year,
been trying to do that for the last couple of years,
Yeah.
but I mean, you know, part of Bob's role was getting on his feet downstairs and then getting to a place that he can do that. So,
By 2020 is probably the right answer.
okay, yeah, I mean, it has to be by 2020.
Yeah.
So we don't know, implementation maybe a year before that at least. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I would just like to say, and I think all of us have to feel good about where we are from a financial perspective now. And the only thing that I think I, as a commissioner, can take credit for is to have listened. And my mentor, Jamie Wolgemuth, told me that when I was running for office, I asked him what makes a good commissioner. And the first answer that he gave me was be willing to listen. And that's not always easy for me, but I set my mind that day that if I was elected, I would listen. And luckily, or should I say we've been blessed with having the right people to listen to. And I certainly include Jay Wanger on that list. I include our comptroller on that list. I include Mark Zettelmoyer with our auditing firm, because these folks gave us good advice and we acted on that advice, and we have the results that we have today. So I'm grateful for the good advice, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to have played just a small role in placing Lebanon County in a good position.
Anything else?
Not at this time.
Cody?
I hate to be the fly in the ointment, but the world of politics rarely is logical. And somewhere down the line, I see a campaign where I'm going to hear a radio spot with a man who has the most sinister voice in the world say, Standard & Poor's has declared Lebanon County Management weak, without any of the context, which is going to have occurred months before and your electorate is going to forget that this ever happened or that any of this was a positive thing. Does the weak management designation bother you at all in those terms?
Not me. I get it that it reflects a wider number of years than we have been around for, so I really don't have a problem. I'm very happy where we are, and so no, and the public, it's going to be hard for the public to grasp all of this minutia of how well we're doing. They may just hear a headline of we got an A, and maybe that'll sink in, but you get beyond that, and I think it gets kind of, with the public, they're so engaged in everything day-to-day life that I don't know that they can zero in on that. And in the case of a campaign, I think, and I don't want to go too deep into this, but it's basically end up spending a lot more money retaliating and then trying to respond to that if you need to. So hopefully that other party that would finance that would be would miss that. But thank you for reminding them.
We did comment on that designation. In our opinion, the commissioners over the last 3 or 4 years have taken all of the necessary steps to be described as something other than weak management, including a fund balance policy, balanced budgets. There was a tax increase. It certainly is not an easy decision. So all of those things, in our opinion, go into that should have been a redesigned characterization, and we commented on that, but it was one of the comments that was not accepted. Again, our ability to comment is supposed to be limited just to factual items, so whatever we comment on what they think, it usually is completely dismissed.
And this could change, this designation? What would be the next step from weak management? What might they say,
That's a great question. There are actually counties rated higher than A with the same designation. So from the rating agency's perspective, it's as much of, have we checked off all the boxes? Do you have a general fund policy? Do you have an investment policy? Do you have a debt policy? And as I said earlier, very few counties have either an investment policy because you are, for the most part, guided or restricted in your investments by state policy. So it's not as if you can really go out and decide how you want to invest your money without just breaking the law. Very few counties have a debt policy because there is a statutory limit under the Debt Act of how much you can borrow, and then there's a practical application of how much debt service you can add to your budget before you have to raise taxes, which brings in a whole nother conversation. So from our side, we don't see a debt policy as being meaningful in whether or not management is weak or strong. But to the rating agency, because they have to be able to assess 67 counties, if you will, equitably, that's the process. And we just don't check off enough boxes to get from weak management to adequate or strong management.
Okay. Thank you.
In response to your comments, Gordy, in reality, the Standard & Poor's report could say strong management, and during a campaign that could become a negative factor. Folks who manage campaigns, as the old saying goes, can take a silk purse and turn it into a sow's ear. So I expressed to Jamie that I had concerns for that, but being reassured that it's recurring and they're looking for multiple years, I'm satisfied with the rating. I think the rating speaks for itself. And the numbers speak for themselves, the things that we have accomplished. So from that standpoint, how do you combat that? I'm not really sure. But it could very well occur. You're probably right.
Gordon, I guess if I may, Standard & Poor's, in their disclosure statement, says that their opinion is not a statement of fact. They do not perform an audit. They undertake no duty of due diligence or independent verification, should not be relied upon in making any investment decision, neither recommends nor will recommend how an issuer can or should achieve a particular credit rating outcome. relies on insurers and their agents and advisors for the accuracy and completeness of the information submitted, has not consented to being named an expert, does not and cannot guarantee the accuracy, completeness, or timeliness of the information relied on in connection with a credit rating, and is not liable to any person for any inaccuracies, errors, or omissions.
That's about as close to the full, complete abdication of responsibility as you can get.
And so from the beginning, I have said chasing the rating is not the end-all to be-all. It's that simple. There are different philosophies and different ways we could have accomplished what has been accomplished. There was a definite difference of opinion. What it has done is done, and we're back to an A, and that's fine. But I think maybe we can put too much emphasis on it.
What's the highest rating the county's ever achieved?
I don't know the
This would be
history. Yeah, I don't know, beyond, or prior to the A minus, I don't remember, in at least my term here, being higher than that A minus. It wasn't changed in 15 years, so this may be. Do you know that? Did you look far back as you can see?
I'm not aware, well, so the history of ratings is through the 60s, 70s, and very early 80s. I would have pursued a rating because there wasn't what we call bond insurance prior to the, called the early part of the 80s. The advent of bond insurance for about 15 years almost eliminated the need for a county to go get an underlying rating. The recession of 08-09 and the fallout of the financial sector and the criticism of the rating agencies and the bond insurers resulted in, I think it was 6 bond insurers going out of business. There are 2 left. They're AA rated. They were AAA rated. And investors have gone back to where we were in the 70s and early 80s, where the underlying rating is now important. So for the better part of the second half of the 80s, the 90s, and the early part of the 2000s, ratings by a county weren't pursued because you have to pay for it. And we just went and purchased bond insurance if there was a borrowing need. Again, because there are only 2 bond insurers left and they're only AA rated, and the investors want an underlying rating, even if you purchase the bond insurance, it's now back in vogue to pursue a rating for every transaction. I would be very, very surprised if the county were ever higher than A, just based on the way counties were rated through the 70s and 80s.
Okay, thank you.
At the risk of taking the bait on this, my whole goal as a commissioner has been to get the fiscal house in order and run a good ship. I think the rating is a bonus, because then when you, as said, if you go to borrow money, you save the county money going forward. So chasing a rate is not where I'm at. It's fiscal stability. We get the good rate, then good things happen in other directions fiscally. So just as a, my personal reaction to the comment.
Yeah, I would say I've heard that phrase, chasing a rating, now probably a dozen times over the past 4 or 5 years. And I would also say that was never my goal. My goal was to place Lebanon County in a better place, and I think we've done that. So thank you, Standard & Poor's, for the A, and where we can use it to our advantage, we will, but that's not why we've done what we've done.
Okay, anything else? Jamie, anything else? Seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Stand adjourned.